I can't hear you, Rashid.
Here we are. There, I want to say to everybody who's listening to the show that right before the show, if we flipped on the screen before we realized that it was live, I was having technical issues. They're telling me they're having technical issues broadcasting to Rumble right now too in the booth. And I did the intro and you couldn't hear it, so forget the intro. Let's go right into it. How's it going, my colleague Charles? How's it going?
It's going well. How are you, Rashid?
I am I'm really, really laboring to do the show. All last night I didn't have a voice. It just went out on me, and I've been gargling. I've been uh, sucking on lemons, everything to try to make sure that I'm able to speak a little bit today.
All
Um,
right.
so first of all, let's just go right into it. What is with these crazy, insane political leaders in Washington, London, and Brussels?
Well, okay. Well, I go first of all to like forget London and Brussels because basically we're pulling all the strings anyway. I mean, basically Europe is just a, you know, sort of a vassal of the empire. At this point, I mean, I think the uh, fact that everybody knows the U.S. blew up the pipeline, the Nord Stream pipeline, and nobody in Europe even wants to talk about it, much less complain about it. I saw just today, one of the Irish members of the EU Parliament got up and said, uh,
Yeah.
he says, he claimed, Hirsch claimed that the U.S. blew up the pipeline, but did you ask them if they did it? No, you're too chicken to ask them. You won't even ask, And I think that sort of sums it up. But yeah, we've got people in Washington who, they are unable, unwilling, I think unable to envision the world that is not, controlled completely by the U.S.
Hmm.
I mean, in other words, this is, the idea that other countries in the world, might have their own sovereign interests and might go their own way on certain issues, and that we just can't go around telling people what to do, overthrowing governments right and left, and all this kind of stuff. They're just unable to handle that, and they're not going to handle it until they are forced to handle it. And I think that's what the Russians have figured out.
You
That
know, oh, I'm sorry. I listened to I think one of the best political geopolitical analysts on the subject of the conflict in Ukraine, and
Yeah.
his name is Alexander Mercouris,
Oh,
and
sure.
he's really good at that. But it's one, and I'm usually in agreement with him on about 80 to 90% of what he says. But it's one thing that stands out that I cannot agree with, and I don't think a lot of people have sat down and thought this through. When they say that the U.S. and NATO are trying to get Ukraine to pull out of Bakhmut and all of those areas that they're nearly surrounded in, but Zelensky keeps giving the order to fight. I don't believe that's a reality because let's just examine American history. When has America ever installed a puppet? When has America ever funded the entire government and military and armed it and allowed it to say no to its demands? That's never happened.
Well, yeah.
America gives you a command, you act on it or you suffer the consequences. I
Hmm.
believe that America has been saying that they have been asking Zelensky and his crew to pull out of those areas that are nearly surrounded as a show for the public because
Exactly.
he is not in any position to buck up against American wishes. All they have to do is cut off the financial spigot or cut off the weapons spigot or
Mhm.
threaten him with elimination. So I think that they're positioning themselves. I believe that the West, the United States, and NATO are positioning themselves uh, to be on. I like. to be on both sides of the coin. If Zelensky maintains Bakhmut and maintains those areas, then the United States will just push that as a great win. But if Zelensky loses, then the United States and NATO can say, we kept telling him to pull out. We kept telling him to pull out.
Oh, yeah.
What say you on that matter? Because I have a hard time believing
Yeah.
that a puppet with no political or economic or even military capital can disobey the orders of the empire.
Of course not. Well, I think we have to remember that Zelensky's great qualification for becoming the president of a nation at war is that he's an actor. And that's all he is. I mean, even now, he is an actor. And he's probably not even, he probably is only being able to act on account of he's a little bit stuffed up with cocaine. But, that'd be beside the point. I think you're correct. I think you're correct that this idea that U.S. people are telling him that he needs to back out, to get a retreat from Bakhmut, that's nonsense. I mean, he would be doing, you're right, he would do what he's told to do. He follows the script that he's given. And so his job right now is to act as the great leader who is so committed to the integrity of Ukraine and, and its sovereign, blah, 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 that he's going to go at all costs. Well, it's all costs, but it's not all costs to him. He's still getting paid. He's still accumulating, millions in offshore accounts. He's still got all of his homes around the world. I mean, it's the people that are being hurt by this are the young men and the old men that are being snatched up off the streets of Kyiv and Lviv and the other cities in Western Ukraine and taken out there to be shot at by the Russians, to be killed basically by the Russians in order to achieve nothing. And that's it. It's all a show. It is all a show for us. Because the goal here, Ukraine is not, you have to remember that the U.S. does not care about Ukraine. We have no reason to care about Ukraine. We don't care whether or not Ukraine is one country or four countries. We don't care about whether, Ukraine decides to kill everybody in the East who speaks Russian. We don't care whether they are a democracy. We don't care if they're committing war crimes against prisoners of war. We don't care about any of that. What we care about is Russia. We care about destroying Russia, getting Putin out of the way, and taking Russian resources and breaking the country up. Because what we're fearing is exactly what we're both causing and fearing at the same time is an alliance between Russia, Iran, and China. Mm-hmm. And once, that's pretty close to being a fact already. I mean, in terms of, now, Russia and Iran are bypassing the US dollar, in terms of their, they've gotten Iran onto their system, not the SWIFT system anymore that we run. The Chinese are in there with their Belt and Road Initiative, all this kind of stuff. So, this is, if that group is together, we then no longer can possibly rule the world because they would be much stronger. They have a tremendous amount of resources. See, the thing is that we don't have all the resources here in the U.S. We have to go and steal it from Africa and Latin America and wherever else. That's what people really fear, people in Washington. And yet what they're doing is actually causing those countries to join together because, it's that or destruction.
First, I want to follow you up on that. And then but before I do that, I want to take time out to give a special thanks to everybody that is joining us, especially in the chat. I want to give a shout out to one of our viewers, No Way Out. Mm-hmm. He's looking at the show and he's viewing it, and it's like 6-something in the morning where he's at. So we want to really thank him for joining us today on the show, especially that early in the morning where he's at. Now, about this thing, this is what I'm saying. America and the empire, her minions are damned if they do, and they're damned if they don't. But they're speeding up their demise through the policies that they believe that will maintain their position for a little bit longer. It seems like
Yep.
they become unhinged to reality and irrational because the policies. Like I was listening to one out of the White House, and he was saying that our policies is our policies are pushing Russia and China and Iran together. Then, in the same breath of speaking, he said, "Well, we're going to put more sanctions on them." And I'm like, did anybody just hear that? Did anybody just did he just take the time out and just pause on what he just said? Because he acknowledged that it was the policies of the United States and the West that are pushing China, Russia, and Iran together. And then he says that they're going to double down on those policies.
Right, exactly.
What sense?
Well, but we let's look at what we have here. We have only a very limited amount of weapons. Okay, because for the U.S., if the U.S. Gets militarily engaged in some other country, they're going to go down to defeat again. The United States hasn't won a single one of the many, many wars that it has engaged in since 1945. It's never won one. I mean, maybe Grenada, but I mean, come on. But, I mean, that's it. So, our tools are the financial tool, which is sanctions, and our control of the petrodollar and the, world financial system in terms of this, the SWIFT system, the International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, et cetera, all controlled by the U.S. So that's really one tool that they can use. Another tool they can use is proxy war. So in other words, they can start a war in some country, usually a civil war, which is basically as a way to get regime change, because what they're really looking for is to get rid of leaders in countries who have a mind of their own. And the third thing is nuclear weapons. And as we all know, once you start with the nuclear weapons, it's over for humanity, period. I mean, we're not going to survive a nuclear war. And I couldn't imagine anybody in the Pentagon actually thinking that we could win one. But you never know. We've had some pretty stupid people at the Pentagon over the years. But so we're sort of limited in what our tools are. And what happens, of course, is that if regime change fails, and if the sanctions fail to generate the regime change that we want, then we're stuck. That's why we're stuck in Syria and we're stuck in Iran, because the regime change operations did not work. And but what are we doing? Well, you may have read that Samantha Power just got back from a trip to Hungary where she met with pro-democracy group. Well, come on. Well, what's wrong with Hungary? Well, what's wrong with Hungary is that Viktor Orban does not want to participate in this war against Russia. And he does not really think that he has an obligation to take refugees from the countries that NATO has bombed. He doesn't think that's really in his interest, as or in Hungary's interest. We can't tolerate that. We're probably going to end up having to regime change Serbia too, because they're making noise. So yeah, and that's just what we do. That's just what we do. And what we're going to do is push more countries into the alternative empire, if you want to call it an empire. But in other words, more countries are going to join with Russia and China and Iran, to oppose the U.S. because that's, being opposed to the U.S. is a problem for countries, but it's not as big a problem as being their ally in a lot of ways, because they're just not a reliable ally. So they do not have your back. Yeah. I don't know whether you heard, but there was this organization called the Committee for the Republic had fellow, I think his name is Landis. He was a former um, Foreign Service officer of Australia, talking about just exactly what the U.S. is doing over there in Asia and trying to basically turn Australia into a huge U.S. military base.
Mhm.
And he said, like, what most people don't know is that the treaty that we have with the United States obligates Australia to come to the U.S., the aid of the U.S. in case of an attack, but doesn't do the reverse. In other words, if Australia is attacked, U.S. got no obligation to help them, you know. Uh, and so they stick all of these military bases and intelligence bases in in Australia, and he's of the opinion that Australia is going to be used as the next Ukraine. You know, that they're trying to figure out a way to attack China, and you know, a lot of the, you know, I don't think the Taiwanese are hot to cooperate with that. And, you know, I wouldn't be either if I was that close to China. Uh, so, yeah, we just keep stirring up trouble everywhere in the world. And then we wonder why they don't like us. Well, you
Yeah.
know, it's ridiculous.
You know, as a few points I want to hit on. First, I want to go back to the Australia thing.
Mhm.
I know a few years ago, I was told that a few of the United States bases or training centers were deliberately put in areas where the indigenous people of Australia are protesting um, for independence
Yeah.
and wanting their land back. And so someone made the point that they are covertly trying to suppress the indigenous people of Australia by putting those military bases or military facilities close to where the indigenous people reside and where they are protesting the presence of colonialism and U.S. Military power on the
Mhm.
in Australia. Another thing I wanted to go back to is Viktor Orban, excuse me, of Hungary. Well, he has been a leader in Europe that, and I don't see anything wrong with this. He wants to keep Hungary Hungarian. I have no problem with that. He doesn't want to be involved in all of these escapades of the empire and trying to weaken Russia, China, Iran, and all of these things. That is put a bullseye on his back for the
Mhm.
empire. The same thing when we look at Serbia, but America has a short memory when it comes to things like this. Even if they were to depose the Serbian leader, do they believe that the Serbians in Serbia would forget that NATO bombed Yugoslavia, bombed Belgrade, used depleted uranium, and
Mhm.
balkanized Yugoslavia? I
Yeah.
mean, this is the thing that this is what I have to bring to the forefront with a lot of people, because when they're talking geopolitics, they seem to leave out certain elements that are key elements when we talk about war, when we talk about whose side is on, whose side this country will be on. If we go to the issue of a U.S.-China war, and we know that the Chinese and the Japanese are at each other from time to time, and we know that they have historical differences, but they also have things that unify them. Now, common sense would tell America that, and I've heard a former Japanese prime minister say that things would be um, real good between China and Japan, and they would be unified if America would leave them to handle their own foreign policy. He says, but if we were to go beyond America, and I'm paraphrasing the word, I'm using dictates. If we were to go beyond U.S. dictates, they have conveyed to us that they would then take the entire island of Okinawa and wouldn't return it. This was on a RT interview roughly about 10 to 12 years ago, something like that.
Mhm.
One of the former Japanese prime ministers talked about that, how the United States threatened to just annex the entire island of Okinawa and the surrounding prefectures or whatever,
Yeah.
if Japan would not play ball. So now, with that being the case, we also know that Japan has a long history, a long memory on history. How does America really feel about Japan, thinking that Japan would be on her side if a war breaks out with China. And we know that the United States used not one but two nuclear devices that on Japan that were unnecessary at the time of their use.
Of course.
So I want you to answer that. Then we're going to come back to this thing about the Ukrainian situation because I want to read something to you.
Oh, okay. Well, you know, as far as as far as the Japanese people, I mean, and I think this is true of a number of countries, that, you know, we've got leaders in these countries who are basically, you know, coming to Washington and kissing the behinds of the appropriate people in Washington, you know, and because what they're doing is they are, you know, following the empire's dictates, and they are probably enriching themselves as a result. But they are ignoring the needs of their own people. And so what's going to happen, I mean, in most of these countries, if you were to have an actual free and fair democratic election, you would end up electing a basically anti-American government. You know, and I think that's true in places like Japan. It's probably true in the Philippines. It's probably true also throughout most of the Middle East. You know, people in Saudi Arabia could have an election, you know, and decide who is running their country, or the people of Jordan, for that matter, or any of these other countries. They wouldn't be electing a pro-U.S. government, and it certainly is becoming even more evident in Africa that people, you know, that many countries in Africa are throwing the French and the Americans out because they don't want neocolonialism. And everybody in Africa knows that what the U.S. wants are the resources of Africa. They want the lithium. They want, you know, all the various other minerals that they need in order to create their new, you know, Teslas or whatever they're making, you know, and you know, and what people are now beginning to say, one of the people I recommend watching a lot is the president of Ghana, the new president of Ghana.
Yes.
Because he's saying, and others are joining him. It's like, no, we're not going to like ship you, in their case, chocolate, cacao beans. You know, we want to make the chocolate in here in Ghana so that we can sell you a $10 bottle, you know, bar of chocolate, and not, you know, sell you, you know, like 50 cents worth of beans and ship them to Belgium so that you can make that $10 bottle. You know, no. You know, we want to do it ourselves. We want to actually reap the benefit of our own resources. And that's not permitted under the whole U.S. system, does not permit that. And we forget that the empire exists to enrich the empire's oligarchs. It does not exist to help the people of the world. You know, that's not relevant. And I think more and more people are waking up to that. And we're going to see that more and more, that people now, you know, I don't want to get off on that tangent quite yet, but I mean, you have to think about the U.S. also. Would we be giving $110 billion to Ukraine while we've got, you know, hundreds of thousands of people living in the streets in this country?
Yeah, we're going to talk
about it. We got millions of people with no health care. We've got people saddled with debt, you know, living, you know, the minimum wage hasn't gone up in like 40 years. I mean, come on. You know, we're you know, if we had a democracy, you know, these people would be, you know, working behind the counter at Starbucks.
Yeah. Before we're going to talk on those issues too, shortly.
Yeah, I know. Yeah,
those are real pressing issues. Before I get to the article, I want to go back to one of our people in the chat. No Way Out. If I'm not mistaken, I believe he said on the last show that he is out of French Polynesia, if I'm not mistaken.
Okay, on the time.
And so I want to his comments. He says, from my point of view, NATO is a U.S. elite tool to control the Western countries and hold them as puppets to their bidding. The silence of Germany about the sabotage, of the pipeline says it all. But let's go a little further. Let's two more of his comments. He says, let me highlight it. The world has not forgotten that a country were founded in 1776, already was in 289 wars, and their count and have 251 military interventions since MC Hammer's too legit to quit in the 90s. Oh my God. Let's see. And another. And he says this. I can confirm that when I was talking about the situation with Japan and how the Japanese, one of the former Japanese prime ministers talked about the threat that the United States issued to them. He said, I can confirm that one of our islands is still occupied by the U.S. since 1942. They returned it on paper in 1946, but still we have no administration access to it or any saying about it. See, that's what happens under the empire. But and this is what I'm saying. These think tanks and these politicians and these military heads, when they calculate wars, they leave out the most intrinsic and intricate elements of the wars. This is why the wars always go wrong for them, because they don't think about the human factor. They don't think about the emotions of the people, the feeling of the people that they're dealing with, the history that they've played with that particular people or country. They leave all of that out, and they think about right now, where they're under our occupation. We have a compliant government. We have military bases there, so they'll be our ally. As long as we can continue to bribe the top, everybody else will go along with the top, the leadership. That's all they do. And they don't sit back and think, well, maybe this is why every time we go on a military escapade, that it fails, and it fails spectacularly. But let's go to something. We're going to go back to what we were talking about with these puppet governments and how pliant they are to what the United States says. On Sputnik News a few days ago, it was yesterday, an article was written. It was titled "Ukrainian Whistleblower Telezinko." I might be butchering his name. He says U.S. intentionally made Ukraine powerless in order to rule it. Now let's just read a few sentences. I haven't read the article, but I had it from yesterday that I was going to. But it says Ukrainian whistleblower Andrei Telezinko has sat down with Sputnik to discuss a recent U.S. congressional hearing which discussed the censorship of Hunter Biden's laptop and Washington's hijacking of Ukraine's powers. I'm banned from coming to the United States. I'm banned from working with any banks or any foreign company. So basically, not only is my travel banned, but also my future. Former Ukrainian diplomat and whistleblower told Sputnik, they came after me just because it was the son of the vice president of the United States at the time, Joe Biden, his son Hunter Biden. And not only Hunter Biden, but the whole Biden family is involved in this. And that's why we have chaos, not only in the United States, but throughout the world. This goes back to something. I'm going to pause right here. On one of our recent shows, we played clips of how Joe Biden bragged when he was speaking in front of a think tank and some journalists, so-called journalists. I don't even refer to a lot of Western so-called journalists as journalists. But and he was talking about how they threatened the Ukraine with not only political and economic ramifications, but they threatened them with other means too. And he said if they did not fire the prosecutor that had found corruption in Joe Biden and his son's case in dealing with the company that was doing business over in Ukraine, and he was Joe Biden as the vice president of the United States at the time. Obama put him in charge of the Ukrainian policy, and Joe Biden had the power of the purse that he could either withhold the money or give it to him, and he threatened the Poroshenko at the time that the prosecutor must be removed, or else that the United States would withhold I think it was $2 billion in aid to prevent a default. And Poroshenko, they removed the prosecutor, and they had it on the phone where they were talking about it back and forth, and how Joe Biden said now they would let the money come through and all of this stuff. And what do you think about this? Why is it such a cover up with Joe Biden, his son, and the political elites, because also, let me tie this in. The FTX, you remember that went belly up, the crypto exchange. There's a lot of evidence saying that was used as kickbacks and to money launder money with the Joe Biden administration, his cronies, and over in Ukraine. What do you say about the sheer corruption of Joe Biden, his administration, and the media for not even covering any of these things that would have gotten any so-called president impeached before that?
Well, in fact, as a matter of fact, threatening to withhold aid from Ukraine is exactly what Trump was impeached for. Remember? Where we had Lieutenant Colonel Vindeman and, all of these people, testifying, oh my God, it would be so horrible if we weren't there to support Ukraine. And that was way back before the war. That was back during the Trump administration. But yeah, I think there's no question that the Biden family is corrupt. Biden for years, he's been in the Senate, 40 plus years, and in power in Washington. He comes from a state that is basically known throughout the world as a sort of money laundering corporate headquarters state, with lax regulation, and that everything is being run by, the big credit card companies, the DuPont family, etc. This is all, Delaware is probably one of the most corrupt states in the union, because again, it's a very small state. It has a handful of very wealthy corporations in that state because they basically tell corporations, come here and incorporate here, and we won't do anything we won't investigate anything you do, pretty much. So yeah, I think there's no question that his family is corrupt, but I don't think the corruption drives anything here. At least at that level. What I would say is that the entire U.S. imperial system is based on corruption. The whole idea of it is, I'm going to come over to your country and force you to give me dirt cheap, your resources, or you give me dirt cheap your labor, whatever it is, and I'm going to really give you nothing in return, basically, except I'm going to enrich a handful of elites, or what we call comprador elites in these countries. But that's the whole system. The whole system is designed to facilitate corruption. Whether it's corruption by the local elites, corruption by the U.S. coming in and bribing all of the leaders there to do something for them. So I think the Biden family just is engaged in doing what people do. That's that's the American way of business. And they accuse Trump of this corruption, and I'm quite sure that Trump is corrupt. But on the other hand, they did not accuse Trump of corruption because he was corrupt. They accused Trump of corruption because they didn't want someone who was not a follower of the establishment, who was not behind all the establishment, rules, that to be in charge. He was too unpredictable. Biden, on the other hand, very predictable. He will read whatever they put on the teleprompter, and to the best of his ability, which, because they are not going to attack him. They're going to, in fact, cover it up. I see you're wearing your Hunter Biden cap, by the way. That's very nice. But
it's an anime. My daughter bought it for me, and she asked me to wear it. It's a Hunter X Hunter.
Oh, yeah, I know.
Anime. She loves anime, so
it's not Hunter, so not Hunter Biden. Hunter Biden has nothing to do with it. But yes, I know. But that's that's it. And I think there's and to me right now, this is what's going on in America, is that we basically have uh, two groups. We have basically an establishment group, and the establishment group is the Wall Street people, all the big corporations, especially the energy corporations. Both political parties, the mainstream of the Republican Party, and pretty much the entire Democratic Party, all of the media, okay, and pretty much all of the think tanks, except for one or two, and they all parrot the same line. And what they want to do is have the empire must continue, the empire must rule the world, and the second thing is that is the neoliberal orthodoxy. You know, that we must continue to impoverish the poor and enrich the wealthy. You know, trickle down economics. Uh, and you know we mustn't government must not get uh, too much into regulation, but they must subsidize the hell out of everything, but they can't regulate it. Um, you know those two things, which are really choking the entire country, are agreed upon by most people and the most leadership of both parties. And it's those people who are against the establishment who stand out, and who uh, and it some people who are against the establishment are on the right, and some of their other policy positions are awful, you know, in my opinion. Some of them, very few of them, are on the left. If you look further to the left in the Democratic Party, by the way, you know, you'll find some other people who are against the establishment. But and that's what people keep voting for in this country. I mean, if you notice our presidential elections, we keep voting for people who appear to be outside the loop. You know, they voted for Trump because he was outside the loop. They voted for Obama because he was definitely, you know, we never had a black man before, so you know he was definitely seemed, and he did not have very much of a. He hadn't been in Washington very long, a couple of years, I think. Um, you know, we had a peanut farmer from Georgia. You know, we had a movie actor. You know, we had all these people because people are going to say, you know, something is wrong with this country. Something is wrong with this country and the way it's governed. So I really don't want to vote for somebody who's basically thinks, you know, who's been a part of that, or who thinks that that is the what we should be doing, because it's not working for me. Okay. But you know that's kind of where we are right now, and that's why there's everything is being done to make sure that those anti-establishment voices, like yours, for example, are not heard. You know, we don't, you know, just hang out. You know, see when you're next invited on to Chris Hayes' show, you know, or get out to CNN. Yeah, you're not. It's not going to happen.
You
Yeah.
I want to just go to a point that you were talking about, and the misappropriation of money in the United States. And excuse me, this goes to the heart of what I often say on the show. They often justify finding money for wars, for regime change, for weapons manufacturers to so-called empower nations like Ukraine, the nations that were self-empowered prior to the color revolution and the overthrows by the West. So they go in there and they justify spending tens of billions and even hundreds of billions of dollars. And we have dilapidated roads here. We have bridges that are in urgent need of repair. We don't have a high-speed rail system. Our technology is lacking. We have fallen so far behind China in technology. And in modernization of the country. Then you look at the explosion of homelessness, hunger, and now that you know, maybe about 2 weeks ago, there was this job report that everybody was upbeat about. Oh, we produced X amount. Then it comes to find out that those were lies, and the figures were made up, and 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 the U.S. is hemorrhaging jobs right now.
Of course.
Why aren't the people in America? I'm talking about the people here
Uh,
doing what they see the people in France or the people in Car or the people in Peru doing. Because these people are getting up off the couches and they're rising up against corruption. They're rising up against the purposefully misappropriation of money and the exclusion of them from the political system.
mm-hmm.
We see them demanding accountability of government and the removal of corrupt and inept leadership. And yet the people here continue to complain.
Yeah.
And yet the government continues to steal and continues to lie and deceive and continues to make war. And there's a saying that says, and we have to bring this up on every show, charity starts at home, then it spreads abroad. There is no greater national security concern than within your own borders, and you're looking around the globe. So if you have to focus your military around the globe, then what's the use of you having the largest military budget in the world? What's the use of you having the second largest nuclear stockpile in the world while within your own borders everything is falling in disrepair?
Mm-hmm. Well, you've got some good points there. Yeah, I think the key nut here is what's keeping us from from rising up in rebellion. And I think the easy answer, of course, is that the media refuses to talk about anything that might upset the establishment narrative. We're not going to hear about Hunter Biden's laptop. We're not really going to hear. We never did hear about what exactly was in Hillary Clinton's emails. We didn't hear anything about that. We heard, it was terrible and they're from Russia and all that other nonsense, but we never heard like what was being said. That was not important. We're not hearing about. We have this major train wreck and huge environmental disaster in Ohio, and we're not hearing much about that at all. If you talk to anyone on the street about the Ukraine situation, they will repeat to you all of the media talking points. You will not be able to convince them that, that there's anything going on there, that you really can't convince people of that because they've been so brainwashed by the media, and they're not a single voice that disrupts that narrative. Okay. And I think that's a part of it. I think another part of it is that we have been essentially disintegrated as a culture. We used to get together, like I'm an old guy, so I remember these days. People used to belong to churches and they would go and sit in the church services with hundreds of other people, and they got to know people in their community, or they belonged to a lodge, or they belonged to a bowling league, or they belonged to whatever. And, and we all read the same newspapers and the same magazines. Okay. Because there was Look and there was Life and there was your local newspaper, which was usually a pretty good newspaper in most cities in this country. But now we don't. Now we all listen to our own little stuff. This guy listens only to Fox, or people on the right, and this guy only listens to MSNBC and CNN and people that are on the excuse the expression left, because that isn't left of anything much, and people who are telling the truth. The problem is, then if I see something that's true, for example, if you say, well, I think that NATO, the U.S. and NATO provoked the war in Ukraine for their own purposes. That's, that is right-wing Russian propaganda, okay? Because it's the only people saying that are people, on the internet, so it's Russian propaganda. We can't cross that right-left divide. A good example of this is this, we're talking on a Friday, the 17th. On this Sunday, there's going to be a massive march, Rage Against the War Machine, in Washington, with demands to not only defund the war in Ukraine, but to defund the military and shut down the CIA and free Julian Assange and several other demands. And it was put together by the People's Party, which is a attempt at a left-wing alternative party to the Democrats, and by the Libertarian Party, which is a right-wing party, pretty much. And so some of the speakers are coming from the right and some are coming from the left to join together. Well, a lot of major organizations on both the right and the left refuse to participate. They don't want to participate because they don't agree with everything that guy over there says. Well, it's like, and in fact, some of these groups, like Veterans for Peace, which I'm a member of, by the way, and Code Pink and some others are holding an alternative rally a month from now. And of course, they will probably exclude all those right-wing voices, all those people who say things that they don't agree with. And so they'll have their own little demonstration. But, the problem is the establishment is not divided right and left. The establishment, does not care, whether you are, whatever your issue is, they don't care whether you are pro or against abortion or whether you think people should have a right to possess guns or not, or whether, you believe in trans rights or don't. They don't care about that stuff. What they care about is holding on to the money, holding on to the power. And when we divide ourselves, we are unable to come together because we don't have the same, we don't have the same facts. We each have a different set of facts, that we believe, because we listen to completely different media. And anybody who does not agree with us on everything is really a bad person. We can't have anything to do with them, because I don't want to be seen on the, with somebody who once said something bad. I don't want to be on the same platform with them, right? So we basically defeat ourselves. We've been. I'm not. The word is not coming to me, but we're
ostracized.
We're isolated. We're socially isolated. Okay, and we're put into our own little, cocoons, and we are fed our own, BS that we're given, our own brand of BS, and so we can't really talk to one another about these things. I mean, that if you're invited to some gathering, if there still are gatherings to which people can be invited, I don't know. But, if you're invited to some gathering, and you start bringing up, let's say, the war in Ukraine or, the Hunter Biden laptop or anything else, people will tell you to shut up, because it's just going to offend people, right? You can't talk about that stuff. And so if we can't talk about it with one another, how are we going to unite to overcome the establishment machine? We can't. We have to learn to say, look, okay, pick our battles. We have to say, look, okay, I don't agree with you about, the immigration, or I don't agree with you about guns, and I don't agree with you about the rights of transgender people. But I think we ought to stop this damn war and quit spending so much money on the military so we have some money left for our own country. Fine. But we have to win over the establishment somewhere, somehow, someday. We have to unite together, because we're not going to do it separately. We're not going to do it while we're all fragmented off in our own little silos.
Well, what do you think is like going through the mind of the average person? And I know you just hit on some of this, but what do you think goes through the mind of the average person, especially the one that's on the street right now that is struggling to pay bills, they're struggling to pay the rent, and is trying to work two jobs, and inflation continues to eat away at the pay, and then the government has no finances for aid, for heating, for transportation, for childcare, for education, for rent or mortgage aid. but yet they can always find 10 billion here, 30 billion there, 40 billion here. Uh, in their eyes, trivial amounts of money for
Right.
weapons makers and for wars.
But but I don't think those people are thinking about that. I think what those people are doing are struggling so hard to keep their head above water and keep food on the table and keep a roof over their heads if they have one. That they're not really thinking about the geopolitical situation. They're not thinking about the structure of the economy, and even if they do have a few minutes to listen to the radio or watch TV, are they going to find any of that out? No. First of all, they're probably going to watch, football or basketball game,
Yep.
or a movie, okay? Because, when you work two jobs and you're slaving, like 10, 12 hours a day or more, when you finally get home, you want to relax. Right? You're probably worn out. You're not going to sit there and start watching, independent news people who are telling you how things are far worse than you imagine that they are. You know, I mean, they're worse than your life is bad enough. You don't need somebody to reinforce how bad the whole world is. You know, um, it's there are those of us who have the luxury, like in my case of being retired, you know, your case of reasonable income, I assume, that you're not, you're we have the time to think about these things and to but most people don't. I think have the time to think about these things, and that's what they count on. You know, um, because if we're prevented from understanding how the system works, and we're very much prevented from understanding how the system works. That then we're just frustrated, but we have no alternative. I think, but many people have no alternative but to just keep plugging away, because if they stop and say no, I'm going to go on strike and get out in the street and protest, they're going to get you know they're going to get fired from whatever menial jobs they have, and they're not, then they're going to end up not being able to pay their rent, you know, because what is it? How many millions of people in this country are, have got less than $400 cushion?
65 million.
Yep, that's it. So those people are, you're not going to organize those people. Um, but yeah, it's a difficult situation, and our entire political system and our entire media system is controlled by the capitalist establishment, and they're not really going to let anything disrupt that. And again, that's why you don't get invited to be on CNN. Yeah.
We're going to address those issues in the chat in just a second.
Yeah.
But I think it's a concerted effort to make the people work like that so that they don't have time to think.
Oh, sure.
Again, let's go back to something, because we're going to transition to the situation with China and the United States, and transition back to the situation with the U.S. and Russia and Ukraine, because I think these are tied so close to what we're talking about
Yeah.
with the neglect at home and,
Mm-hmm.
and the contempt. Because I don't care how people try to frame this. When a government continues to pour out your tax money and continue to borrow from the world to fund military adventures around the world, this is the height of contempt to their own citizens, because they are putting, not only are they ignoring the suffering of the people there by taxing them through doing stuff like that, but they're showing contempt that they don't care that these people are going to have to pay for these bills later down the line, and the children will be saddled with the deal, with the debt, and the children's children will be saddled with the debt. All they care about is trying to accomplish a certain goal and remaining in power and stealing as much money as they can while they can. But I want to address a few things in the chat, but I want to go to something um, about the contempt and the inconvenient truths of that get ignored in the media, because I know you touched upon that. I was listening to a conversation between the I think parliamentarians of the EU Council or whatever, I believe the EU Parliament, and they were talking about the influx of migrants and immigrants, or illegal migrants or illegal immigrants, whichever way they phrased it. And they were talking about this is becoming a heavy burden, and we should not be made to bear this burden. And I could feel the pain of the people, the average person whose tax dollars go out to do this. But what those parliamentarians did not address was the core issue of why there is a flood of immigrants from the Middle East and Africa to Europe. Listen, on this show, we do not hold back. We tell the truth. Even if it's against ourselves, we're going to put the truth out there. This has nothing to do with a particular country. This has to do with truth. And a lot of times, because of this, I call it a Walt Disney World, we don't like truth. We like make believe. We like story, the feel good stories, but we got to bring it to you raw and butt naked. The reason that there's an influx of migrants or refugees from Africa and from the Middle East is because of the direct involvement of Europe, or when the European Union does not want to be viewed as a military, when they want to be viewed as a military alliance, they call themselves NATO. When they want to be viewed as a political and economic alliance, they call themselves the European Union. But they're one and the same. The bombing, they don't just go in and destabilize these nations and overthrow leaders. They destroy government infrastructure. Muammar Gaddafi gave a lecture. He gave a speech about he was the gate that prevented the influx of migrants into Europe. He said, and if you remove me, he said, I've gotten information that you want to remove me. If you remove me, then you're going to deal with a migrant crisis, the likes of which you've never seen before. But NATO nations and the United States ignored his warnings. And not only did they remove him, they removed the very institutions that made Libya a viable nation. They don't just go in and remove the leader, they destroy the government institutions. And so the people of those nations have nowhere to turn. They've been bombed, they've been raped, they've been pillaged, they've lost everything. So now they're migrating to a place that they feel is responsible for their misfortunes.
Yeah.
And so this becomes another tax on you in Europe due to the irrational, racist, and exceptional policies of those leaders of those European nations. A lot of people don't want to accept that, but that is the absolute truth.
Right.
If the nations were allowed to prosper and flourish under their own government and under their own political system and under their own cultural system, then there would be no need for them to leave where they are and go into Europe. Think about this. I want to put this on your mind. There is no African or Middle Eastern country or Latin American country that has a base in Europe. But there are multiple European countries and Western countries that have illegal bases in Africa, the Middle East, and Latin America. And they ignore the will of the people constantly. So this influx of migrants is a direct result of imperialistic policies in those nations. And that's something that must be addressed. So I have to put that in there. Now, as we transition to what's going on with America and China and America and Russia, notice that before America, and this is cut and paste, cut and paste. You can go back, it's a trail of this. Whenever America gets ready to antagonize or provoke or even make war with a nation, she provokes a nation, and when the nation responds, or she demonizes the response of the nation, and then every time you turn around, there's something in the news about that nation that puts that nation in the bad light. We're seeing that with America and China. Any rational person, any logical thinking person, any person with just just an ounce of common sense will see that China is not the aggressive nation. China does not have 800, 900, 1,000 military bases around the world. China
Zero.
is not
Yeah,
basing her
one.
military
Yeah.
in the Persian Gulf, I mean, in the Gulf of Mexico, you know, or off the coast of California. Right. But it's America that is doing the thing that she is saying that China and Russia is doing. She's projecting the things that she's doing. She's projecting it upon them. And then she calls them, she says that these people are being aggressive and provocative. When she flies her F-35s close to Crimea, or she flies her F-16s near Russia's airspace or over the South China Sea, and China or Russia responds, this is provocative. They came close to our warplanes, or we were having peaceful flights. The people don't stop to think, well, this is over the South China Sea, not the South American Sea. They don't say that this was over California. This was over Crimea, or over close to what is it? Stalingrad? Well, not Stalingrad. What is the territory in Europe? The enclave, the Russian enclave in Europe.
Yeah, Leningrad.
Leningrad. When NATO sells ships or flies planes close to that, and Russia responds, Russia in the news is deemed provocative. China in the news is deemed provocative, and nobody questions, why are the West over there? Why are they doing this? Why are they funding this?
Yeah.
And I said that I'm going to let you respond on it, but I said that because I was addressing something that somebody in our chat was talking about. So go ahead and address that, then I'll put some of their comments on the screen.
Yeah, no, I think it's not that people are not asking questions about that. You and I are asking questions about that. You know, you have Scott Ritter's asking questions about it. You know, Carl McGregor's asking questions about it. You know, I mean, even Jimmy Dore's asking questions about it. But, you know, that those questions are not being allowed to be heard. I mean, this is the thing, you know, and most people get their information from mainstream sources or from sources that appear to be alternative, but basically are just regurgitating the mainstream thing, you know, with maybe a little inflection or something over here and there. But, you know, most people are telling you exactly the same story. And so people basically are unaware. I mean, this is the big part of the problem, is that people are unaware of these things. But yeah, I mean, the military base thing, I mean, there are so many U.S. military bases in close proximity to China that it's just incredible. I mean, you got the Philippines, you've got Japan, you've got, you know, the Okinawa bases, you've got, you know, bases all over the place, you know, that are basically pointed at China. And just as the way that we, you know, pushed NATO right up to the border of Russia, you know, but of course that's not, you know, aggressive by any means. Yes, and your person there, Lex, who's commenting, he's right. You know, that is exactly what this rally on coming Sunday, is designed to do, is to say, you know, let's stop being an empire. Let's close these bases down. Let's cut the military budget down to, you know, a fraction of what it currently is. Let's disband the CIA and its, you know, the NED and the USAID and all these other regime change operations we got running around. Let's stop all that crap and concentrate on helping the people of America. And you know, that, but we can't be heard. That cannot be heard. You know, there, you will not see that rally and the speakers from that rally on the news, you know, on Sunday night. Don't be looking for it, you know, on the night news. Yeah, you won't see it.
I want to go back to something Lex said. He's about the bases. Let me go back up here, and he says one way for America to solve this is to give their hegemonic imperialistic stance, disband their 800 bases worldwide. That would be a start. That would be a good start, but America has put herself, see this, again, there's something missing in here. that would put America. She's right now. She's in a catch-22. She is, and we must acknowledge that she has alienated the nations around the world so much that she feels that if she pulls back, now mind you, to keep these bases, it costs money that she has to borrow. But if she pulls back, she no longer can have the gun to their head and force them to trade in dollars. And if that is the case, boom goes the empire, boom goes the dynamite. So she's caught in a catch-22.
Well, yeah, and what's going to happen is, regardless of whether, basis or not, what's happening very rapidly around the world is that people are not trading in the U.S. dollar anymore, because not only because all that does is feed the war machine and feed the U.S. empire to give it more power to basically usurp your own country's sovereignty. But it also means that the U.S. can just flat out steal your money whenever they feel like it. Like we took billions from Iran, we took billions from Russia, really, and we took billions in gold from Venezuela. I mean, why? Why would you put your money into a bank that basically has a big hole in the bottom where people come in and steal your money away? I mean, or can decide, like, at the drop of a hat, oh, I'm sorry, we close your account. We're giving your money to Raytheon. I mean, nobody would do that. And I think once there is a viable alternative, in which I think we're probably less than a year away from a viable alternative, assuming that we, don't get caught up in a nuclear war, that it's going to be here, and countries are going to stop, with the dollar. And once that happens, once there is an alternative system whereby countries can trade and not have the dollar, you're going to see you're really going to see a collapse of the empire. And the people in Washington know that. And they're I mean, why did we get rid of Gaddafi? We got rid of him because he wanted to start he had a huge pile of gold, and he wanted to start a new currency for all of Africa that was going to be based on gold and would be guaranteed with gold. We could not have that. We've and right now we have African countries getting together now, beginning to talk about forming their own currency union, that's not dependent on the CFA franc or any of this other stuff. It doesn't necessarily trade in dollars. We have Latin American countries talking about creating a Latin American currency. That's why we keep overthrowing, governments over there. And, and of course the Russians, Chinese, and Iranians are all in that same game, probably going to be, many other nations are going to be joining them. But, once there's a viable alternative that has the infrastructure capability to do what the U.S. dollar, the petrodollar does, then it's over. It's over. I mean, people are going to bail out. And so that they are really trying to stop that. Now, there's another alternative to that. I mean, which I don't think nobody would even discuss, which is, let's just stop, and let's stop taking our money and throwing it on all this military stuff, and let's basically tax all the people who have been making money off of the U.S. government's, U.S. empire. Let's take that money back from them, and let's build up our own country. Let's create industry again. Let's build up our infrastructure. Let's get our people off the streets and into homes. Let's have decent health care, including mental health care for people. Let's start, let's make college free for most people. Let's do what we need to do to build this country, and our own people. I mean, we could do that, and we'd probably undergo some a few months or years of trouble. Okay, but we could come out the other side, and we'd be stronger than before, and we certainly be more peaceful than before. But they're not going to do that because they're going to hold on to the current system, the current neo-colonial empire system that they have, until they'll have to pry it out of their cold dead hands. As, we used to hear, and they're not going to give it up. And as a result, millions of people are going to get killed probably, because they won't let go and do what's right for the people of this country.
So I'm going to follow that up, but I'm going to follow it up after this clip. We played this clip on a previous show, but it goes exactly to what the conversation is about at this moment. And then on the end of that clip, we'll go back and we'll address some of the comments in the comment section.
Sure.
And because as I often tell the people, comment, your thoughts and your opinion is just as important as mine and whoever we have on the show. And this is the only way that solutions are found. So we'll go. I want you to listen to what this guy is saying. I wasn't going to play this, but as I kept reading the comments in the comment section and I was listening to you and about this monetary system and how America continues to try to hold on to dollar hegemony at all costs. I just want you to listen to what they're saying about China and what they're saying about a new system taking hold. This is only a minute, 12 seconds, so pay close attention.
China is the world's largest industrial economy, in my view, and Iran, which has been under sanctions, but still China treats Iran as an equal. And this is very, very important today. On the global dimension, as your guest said, that we have a unilateral system which has doomed humanity to failure. It has doomed itself economically, socially, and culturally to failure. And there's need for a new system in the world where nations are treated equally, but also can cooperate for mutual benefit, as the Chinese say, a community of a shared future for all mankind, where you have a new system. I mean, there's a fact that the economic power in the world has shifted to the east, with China at its core. And the going east is no longer a matter of taste, it's a necessity for many nations. But this does not mean that we should have a new Cold War or a new split world, but that the West should learn the lessons of the past 30 years of wars and interventions and destruction, and how China has managed through the Belt and Road Initiative, through this friendly relationship with other nations, to build a completely new system.
So in this, he was talking about to take a look at China's model and how China is rising and how China doesn't view smaller nations or nations with less economic clout or less infrastructure. China views them as equals and not as vassals. And I remember there was a statement by Russian President Vladimir Putin when he talked about the European Union and NATO. And I'm paraphrasing, but the words I'm using, he actually used. I'm just going to paraphrase with some of them. He said that America is hegemonic and will not allow for equal players or partners, only vassal states. And that is what we see. And that's why more nations are pulling away from US hegemony, from dollar hegemony, because to be tied to the dollar is to also be at the mercy of American imperialists. They can mess with the interest rate and cause inflation in your country and cause the overthrow of your government. They can stymie your economic growth. Look what they did to Japan after Japan, because people forget that Japan was China before China. And when Japan started rising economically, the United States put a halt to it. But the Chinese were a little bit more tactful in their doing it. They started investing in the U.S. so that the United States would not see them as a threat, and they built up their military slowly and covertly while they built up their economic. And before you knew it, the Chinese had arrived economically and had almost become a peer competitor militarily. So now the U.S. couldn't do to them what they did to Japan, because China also had a lot of investments around the world and they were holding huge amounts of gold. But again, let me go back to a comment. It says, yes, the world is already moving away from the dollar. BRICS is gaining momentum. Yes, as a matter of fact, Algeria, Egypt, and Saudi Arabia are putting in applications to become full members of the BRICS organization. You have a lot of Latin American nations, and there are at least 3 or 4 more African nations that have put in, and we see more of the Eurasian nations starting to redirect themselves from the Western-oriented world order to the BRICS and to the Eurasian Economic Union and to the ASEAN unit. Go ahead.
Because I think there's a key difference here, because what American government wants you to believe is that the Chinese are just doing what we do. In other words, they're just like we are. They think like we do, but that's not true. I mean, what we have been doing, what the U.S. empire has been doing, is basically colonialism. We have been the successor to the European colonial empires, and we've done the same thing, and the whole model is really the same. And it's I mean, I believe thoroughly it is a completely racist model. It's those other people who don't look like us and don't talk like us and don't think like us, we can just use them. They're just, they are basically our economic slaves, and we can take up all of their resources from them, and we will make all the money from those resources, and we won't give them any. I mean, we wouldn't treat any equal nation like that. And that's the model that we have. The Chinese model is, I'm going to come over and we're going to have a talk, and we're going to say, like, okay, how can we help you? We need something that you have, and what do we have that you need? How can we help one another and build a relationship in which we are actually helping each other? I mean, that's what the Belt and Road Initiative is all about. Why is it that China can build a high-speed railroad, through Laos, and we couldn't in all the years since the war, after we bombed the ever-living crap out of Laos, and turned it, all the horrible things we did there, with Nixon's secret war. And we didn't do anything for reparations. We didn't even clear the mines that we put in their fields. But here comes the Chinese, and they're building a high-speed rail link that's going to bring a great deal of economic prosperity to the Laotian people. Now, we had plenty of chance to do that, but that's not our model. That's not what we do. That's what they do, and they're being very successful with it. And they're also being very successful with it in Africa. I mean, the African people suffered so much under the European colonial powers that brought slavery. That brought that just brought chaos. And then when the colonial powers left, the 1 or 2 great African leaders, like Nkrumah and Lumumba and Thomas Sankara and the others, really tried to come up with a African way of doing things, and they got themselves assassinated by the Western intelligence agencies, and got their country taken over and handed over to an elite that was basically totally corrupt in the hands of the colonial powers. And then of course it's their fault that they did not become economic powerhouses, right? It's and we've done the same thing. The U.S. is doing the same thing, except through their financial means. But that's just not the Chinese model, and it's not the Russian model. And I mean, right now the Russians, the people of Africa, remember that when they were fighting against colonial domination, that it was the USSR who was helping them. It was the USSR who was helping their rebel groups to overthrow the colonial administrations. And so now when they're throwing the French and the Americans out and wanting to, you know, uh, get help from Russia to overcome the problems that they have with terrorism, for example. Because the Russians are actually fighting terrorism, as are the Chinese, while the U.S. and the French are fighting it with one hand while they're funding it with the other, because they won't. Yeah.
On here, I'm looking at some of the comments.
Yeah,
I'm
go
gonna
ahead.
post a few comments and then we're gonna continue on. It says, I believe most don't want it, but the indoctrination in the U.S. is so strong, and the U.S. media is doing a good job of putting a person one against each other. Just look at when Trump got elected. That's true. Let's see. Yeah, he's right when he says that U.S. media is crazy, but it's not just the U.S. media; it's the Western media, because the Western media follows the U.S.'s lead. Now let's go. It says, here, this is one of the ones I wanted to address right here. It says this war can also be easily stopped by accepting Russian proposals for European security guarantees. That's all Russia wants. It's pretty simple. No, it's not that simple. Listen, if it was that simple, it would have been done. Again, let's go back to what I said earlier.
Yeah.
Vladimir Putin understood that America will not accept those guarantees. He understood that. But he had to put the guarantees out so that they would not say that he was have any hold on him saying that he was a belligerent, irrational leader. He said also that America only accepts vassals. If you know that America only accepts vassals, do you believe that America would agree to a so-called European security guarantees? Now, I want to go into this European security guarantee because, again, remember the minute stuff, the little stuff that most people glance over, they look over. Now, look at this. Russia said that they wanted security guarantees, that NATO would not push further eastward and would not gobble up any more of the former Soviet nations, okay? And they wanted security guarantees that the United States would not put missiles and missile defense systems and ring it all around Russia because of Russia's national security interests. Any sane person knows that America is not going to accept that. America does not accept dictate. She gives them. That's why she's an empire. That's why she believes herself to be the exceptional nation. Now, I hear this term, European security guarantees, but in what frame are you going to say European security guarantees? Because let us look at the whole globe, okay? Let's look at, because we have to look at this thing as it is and not as we perceive it to be. There are not Latin American nations invading and occupying European nations. There are no African nations occupying and invading European nations. There are no Asian nations waging war and occupying European nations. But we can say that there are European nations doing that to Latin America, Africa, and Asia. We can say that. We can say that, and we can point to it. Right now, we can still point to it. Even to this day, the Britain does not want to give up those islands back to Argentina. A world away, they don't want to give them back to Argentina, and they're prepared to go to war for it. Now, if you talk about security, it must be security of the rest of the world also, because there's no, how can we look at a European security apparatus when it's European nations that are plundering the world?
Well, you can at least, I think the problem is that we have to tackle these things one at a time. And I think that you can tackle, I do think that, frankly, when I look at that proposal that was made by Putin in December of 2022, a couple of months before the war, it was a perfectly rational proposal. If we had granted every single thing that he asked for, it would have absolutely no effect whatever on U.S. security or on the security of any European nations.
But it would have affected the empire, though.
No, but it was a threat to the empire, but it would not be a threat to the security of any of these nations.
Right.
But and the other thing, is that the Russians actually believe in diplomacy.
Yes.
That was a proposal. That was not a like demand. You see, this is the difference. The United States does not make proposals and then go into negotiations. The United States makes demands, and if you don't agree to them, we will, regime change you or sanction you or whatever the hell. We don't do diplomacy, and that's why this bozo we have in Washington now, Blinken. Every time he goes out somewhere, he just makes a complete fool of himself because he doesn't even understand the word diplomacy. All he understands is the rules-based international order, which means the U.S. makes the rules, and we give the orders. But yeah, this is it's ridiculous. Yes, but yeah, I do think now, and I see you have another comment there. Do you want to read that one that No Way Out has there?
Yeah.
Read that.
No Way Out says Lex, he was responding to Lex in the chat.
Right.
He says, indeed, but the puppets in Europe prefer to shoot themselves in the leg to please the US elite. We still receive fuel, petrol, and gas from Russia, and prices have not changed at all. We export fruit. Well, that's the thing. Russia is willing to work with nations and on a fairer level than the Western nations, because it's all about exploitation. Just like with the wheat from Ukraine. Mm-hmm. There was a report that some of the wheat was going to feed hogs in Europe instead of the people who needed the wheat. Right. That the United States and Europe was making this big brouhaha about that we need to, people will starve, and then it comes to find out that a large portion of the wheat that Russia had agreed to allow out of the ports of Odessa. Mm-hmm. to be transited around the world for people who may need it, that Europe was using a large portion of it to feed hogs instead of giving it to the people who actually need it. And Russia was making up the difference at lower prices, and even giving some out to some of the nations that were supposed to get some of the wheat and the grains from these things. But nobody said anything about that in the news. I mean, it's absolutely astonishing.
But there's I think what we're seeing now in most of the capitals of Europe, which again the Western media is not reporting, but in Paris and in Berlin and London, people are rioting in the streets. I mean, why should they be paying huge increases in their fuel prices, their utility bills, and their food prices? Because their country hasn't got the guts to tell the U.S. to take a hike, and go ahead and deal with Russia. Russia would deal with all of those European countries right now. It's not, and then they claim that, because of Putin's war, this blah, 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 we haven't got the oil. Well, that's not Putin's war. It's your response. It's your war that you forced him into, and it's your response to that war. It's your idiotic sanctions, that basically are hurting European people. Now, the European people need to rise up. I mean, they have a more of a history of rising up, and I think they're less indoctrinated than we are here in the U.S. But they need to rise up, and they need to overthrow their own governments and have put in a government that has the guts to tell the U.S. to get lost. That we're not playing your game. That's not in our interest. I mean, the Germans particularly.
And it kills me. It kills me when the prices go up. Putin has done this. When your cat get run over in the street, Putin is the cause of my cat getting run over. When something happens, it's always Putin this, Putin that. They act like he is an island unto himself. This man is a duly elected president of the Russian Federation, and he represents the people of the Russian Federation. And they are trying to demonize him and trying to remove him from the position that he has and from the people that he represents. He represents the Russian Federation, and he is putting in policies that are instrumental in securing the needs of the Russian Federation. So when I stumped my toe, it was Putin's fault. I fell off my bike, it was Putin's fault. This is what you hear from the politicians in the West. Mm-hmm. Everything is Putin's fault. They never point the finger at themselves. My grandfather used to say, whenever you point a finger at somebody, 3 or 4 more is pointing back at you. This is what we need to start thinking about when we hear these people lashing out. They never want the blame to come and fall where the blame is supposed to fall. Now I'm going to put up a few more clips now.
Go ahead.
Let's see. I'm butchering it. FMAP News says, should we be saying the U.S. or the elites when we attribute and describe activities? We should say both, because the elites run the U.S. Military. The elite runs the U.S. military industrial complex. The elites run the U.S. government. And unless the U.S. people and I'm not pushing for overthrow, because I don't want YouTube to delete my channel, because they've already said if I talk too much on politics or elections or something, that they were going to wipe out my channel. So I'm not pushing for overthrow, but I'm saying unless the people of America rise up, you get blamed for the actions of your government. Are they blaming Russians for what Putin is doing?
Well, the problem that we have here, and this is where social media has become so important, the Twitter files and all of the things we're hearing, is that, we don't want people, we want people to trust their government and to trust the media. And, the elites want us to trust the government and to trust the media because they control both. But, and when you are undermining trust in the government or trust in the media, then you're going to get in trouble. You're going to be accused of disinformation or being a Putin puppet or whatever the thing is. But on the other hand, that's, I think people have to mistrust the government and they have to mistrust the media. I mean, I try to tell my progressive friends, if you find yourself agreeing with the statements of the Secretary of State, or the head of the CIA, or the head of the FBI, or Department of Homeland Security, if you find yourself agreeing with those people on something, you better re-examine yourself, because you're on the wrong side. And until people start to realize that, we're not going to really get anywhere.
Right. Now, No Way Out says, and I know we have somebody from Russia in the chat. I'm going to put them up in a second.
Oh, yeah. Please.
But No Way Out says, I remember back in 2010 where Germany wanted to bring back their gold. I remember that too. And the U.S. declared they do not allow a control of the stockage and would not get it. This gold did not exist anymore. Well, it's gone. Yeah. Well, this is the thing. The United States and the West, they had been leasing out gold, and they had been to settle a lot of debt. And as I said on one of my previous shows, they've scrubbed the search engines of this, but if you stay at it, you can find this. A few years ago, maybe 10 years ago, something like that, the United States and Britain were caught settling bank-to-bank debt with tungsten. Tungsten is a material that weighs and has the same density as gold, and it looks like gold. And what would happen is they were encasing the tungsten in gold, maybe like an inch of gold, and then the rest would be tungsten. So when you do a superficial test, you would think that these pallets full of tungsten, you would think that these were gold. And then they tried to put it on the Chinese, but it was the Chinese who had tipped the people off that they had also been paid in tungsten too, from the UK and the US. And this like the story was like washed off the search engines or whatever. And this was like major. It was, and you can hear Peter Schiff talk about this from time to time, and how the gold has shifted from west to east now. This is why China set up the Shanghai Gold Exchange. And as a matter of fact, I have a clip. Matter of fact, let me play this clip real quick up from China. Let me pull the clip up about, and I'll stop it. I'm not going to play the whole clip, but I want you to hear that what they're saying about Xi Jinping and how he said that he would use the Shanghai Exchange to further strengthen the yuan. This is a 7-minute clip, but I'm only going to play the first few, maybe 30, 40 seconds of it when they're talking about this. So just pay close attention.
Chinese President Xi Jinping says his country would work to buy oil and gas in the yuan. a move that supports Beijing's goal to establish its currency internationally. Xi says Beijing will also make full use of the Shanghai Petroleum and Natural Gas Exchange as a platform for oil and gas trade with the yuan. He made the remarks in Saudi Arabia.
So this is what is really making America transition towards China. See, unlike all of the other nations, China has institutions in place now that challenges every level of power that the Western world has. They have their own SWIFT. They have union pay. And their union pay rivals Visa and MasterCard. They have the AAIB Bank, which is the Asian Infrastructure Bank, where they fund infrastructure projects all across Asia with low interest rates so that people don't have to take out money from the IMF or the World Bank. They have the BRICS Bank that is a complementary to the AIIB Bank. They are now doing currency swap agreements, trade agreements, and they've set up a gold exchange. They already had one in Hong Kong, and so they're funneling gold in through Macau, through Hong Kong, and through China. And China does not export gold, so that's another thing. And a lot of the pundits, the economists are saying that from their numbers, China is holding between 30 and 45,000 tons of gold that they are not reporting. And let me speak on this real quick before we go to the next comment. Why does China hold this amount of gold that they don't comment about? This is my thought on this, and this is an educated thought. I can be wrong, but this is an educated thought. China has been watching how the United States handles countries that they view as enemies and rivals. They even watched how America did Russia with Russia's currency holdings. And China knows that it has over $1 trillion in US treasuries that they're holding. Well, to offset any losses, you have gold to offset those losses, because gold has intrinsic value. Silver has intrinsic value. So China sets up gold reserves, silver reserves. They have copper reserves. They have all of these things that are vital to industry and vital to economics. They have these reserves, unlike the United States that only has the oil reserves and so-called gold reserves. I believe this is to ensure that once China's economy detaches and is acknowledged as the biggest economy, and if America and China goes into war, I believe this is to offset any financial losses from the dollar. If the United States tries to steal the $1 trillion+ in holdings that China has, I do believe that. So I think these are smart moves. Now, let's go to something. Let's go to it. It is another comment. We're having multiple comments. Let's see. Let's go down.
That's good.
From Russia. I think I'm trying to find the Russian comment. So many comments are coming in. So it's just a second. Hold on a second. Okay. We have a comment, a smiley face, a smile from Russia. I don't know the name. I'm sorry if I can't pronounce your name. I think this is Russian. Yeah, I think it's Russian. It could be Ukrainian. I think it's Russian, but I thought, oh yeah, that's Russian because, he's from Kaliningrad, the enclave that we were talking about, the Russian enclave in Europe.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So thank you for joining us from Kaliningrad. We were just talking about the situation that is going on economically, politically, and geopolitically. Now, Lex says this, that also Africa is moving towards Russia and China's. Sudan approved a Russian naval base. Yes, the United States tried to stop that naval base, but Russia explained to them exactly why it's there. And it met the needs of the Sudanese military and the Sudanese government, and they finally approved it. But America was trying to bribe the Sudanese leaders to prevent that, and Israel tried to bribe the Sudanese leaders with weapons and technology to prevent a Russian naval base in Sudan. But it says, and they put a middle finger to France and kicked them out. Yes, all of the former French colonies, they're moving away. This is what I'm saying. This is what Charles was talking about how nations are moving outside of the colonial past or the colonial West. And go ahead, Charles. I know you want to.
Yeah, no. I think you're absolutely right. It's a colonial model. This is what, but the U.S. and the European countries want to impose on Africa and the rest of the world. But we're talking Africa right now. Is a colonial model. I mean, it has the same racist background, the same extractive, purpose as colonialism. It's just under a slightly different form now, because we can't, but and what the Russians and the Chinese are both doing is saying, is coming to them as equals and saying, okay, you have things we need. How can we help you? We have things you need, and let's work out something together. And it's mutually beneficial. Now, the colonial model doesn't care about mutually beneficial. We're only trying to benefit one party. And that's the European party or the U.S. party. We don't care about the other people. They're just there, we will bribe them or do whatever we have to do because that's, and that this makes a lot of sense for them to want, as No Way Out says, they want the U.S. gone to work with the China and the Russian Federation. Absolutely correct, and I don't blame them. In fact, the people that I question are the ones who are still enmeshed with the U.S. and the European countries. But when you look at Africa, I mean, things are beginning to change because for a long time there were only really two nations in Africa who weren't part of the colonial system, in Eritrea and Zimbabwe. And of course, they were sanctioned up to the yazoo, by the US, and they were like, oh, they were, horrible, and we were told never to go there, and blah blah, but they were actually trying to be self-sufficient, and this is what I think is so key for these nations that have been under the colonial yoke for hundreds of years, is they need to become self-sufficient. They need to be put themselves in a position where they are not reliant on an external power, particularly a European or American external power, to survive. To have, for they need to be able to grow their own food. They need to be able to actually produce things in their country, not just ship raw materials out for somebody else to produce, but to actually create jobs in their own country for their own people. I mean, that's what they need. And every time a country has tried to do that, the colonial powers have done their dead level best to stop them. Yeah.
I'm sorry. I was just thinking as you were talking, I was thinking about Sergei Lavrov, the foreign minister of the Russian Federation, and how his diplomatic team runs circles around practically all diplomatic teams around the world, with the exception of the Chinese, who had the retiring foreign minister with his Wang Yi. He was pretty good also. But and how he masterfully helped the Malian government out. They know that France was entrenched deeply in these former French colonial nations, and what they did, they sent in the Wagner Group, right? Because they understood that these governments of these militaries would be overthrown or be killed by France or so-called NATO nations because they wanted them out. So the government, I mean the military, after the military asked, they put in government, and the representative of the
breaking up.
Government asked to come in. The Wagner Group came in, and the Wagner Group started securing government buildings, and they started almost being bodyguards to politicians, and they started training the Malian military. This prevented the French military from exacting revenge on the Malian military and the Malian government for demanding the French to leave. And the French, especially after finding mass graves outside of French bases in Mali. This is something that the news did not talk anything about. But the French military is responsible for mass graves in Mali and in some of the other French former colonies.
Yeah.
But listen,
Well, just parenthetically, the reason we don't hear about Africa on the news isn't because there isn't anything happening in Africa. It's that there's nothing. If we provide the news from Africa, we might find out what is happening, what has been happening in Africa, and then we're going to look at ourselves and say, "Oh, maybe we shouldn't do that."
And the French acted like a scorned lover when the Russians moved in. Right, it's hilarious because the French had been colonizing these areas for over a century or something, and Russia comes in to lend a hand, just like the Soviet Union did. As a matter of fact, one of the most fierce fighting areas that where Ukrainian and Russian forces were fighting, and U.S. and Western special forces were fighting, was the Patrice Lumumba Highway in Ukraine. It was named the Patrice Lumumba Highway in Soviet times in Ukraine. So that's the Ukraine. The Soviet Union helped with weaponry and training to for African nations to decolonize themselves. But listen, an article comes up, and this is what it says: Lavrov challenges French neocolonialism claims. Now, how can France even claim that Russia is trying to colonize Mali? But listen to what it says: Paris is attempting to demonize Moscow by projecting its own guilt onto it. The foreign minister has said. French allegations that Moscow is pursuing a neo-colonialist policy in Africa turns reality upside down, Russian Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov has said, adding that they are part of the Western proxy war against Russia. France and other European nations committed multiple bloody atrocities on the continent. And even today, Paris openly considers Africa its backyard. Now, this goes to something that Joseph Borrell said. Remember Joseph Borrell, the foreign minister or the foreign policy maker of the French, when he said, of the European Union, when he says that Europe is a garden and we must tend to the garden and keep everybody from entering the garden, because everything outside of the garden is a jungle. Then he tells Lavrov, because Lavrov spoke to the media and said that Borrell personally told him, stay out of our Africa. That's ours. The resources there are ours. Now, if that is not racist, if that is not exceptionalist, you tell me what is.
No, absolutely. Completely. Yeah.
I mean, that's crazy, but we'll be wrapping up in just a second. Let's see. Lex says they promised Gorbachev, but that was a lie. Oh, true. But you might want to expound on that.
Oh no, just as people don't know, I mean, when East and West Germany combined, finally, and so to be a single Germany that was part of NATO, when they met with the Russians, with Gorbachev, they agreed, and we have a lot of documentation of this, that there would not be any expansion of NATO beyond Germany. And of course, we all know now that that was a lie. But they didn't get it in writing, and Gorbachev wasn't smart enough, to get it in writing. But the problem that you end up with like this is that and the Minsk Accords are another good example of this, where diplomats from the West, from France and Germany and the U.S., they sat down and they made an agreement for how we would proceed in Ukraine to avoid a war. But they had no intention of ever implementing that agreement. And we now know that. They've admitted it, that it was all a ruse to just give Ukraine time to arm themselves. But, when nations do this over and over again, when they enter into agreements and sign, their president's name to papers and then ignore them totally, then how is are other nations supposed to believe them? How are you going to negotiate with somebody that is a serial liar? I mean, you have no reason whatever to believe them. And it was, as Ronald Reagan said, something you trust but verify. But now we have to verify everything because there's nobody we can trust. There's nobody can trust us. It's really be more precise. There's nobody that can trust us.
And Vladimir Putin said it more beautifully and articulate than I could ever say. He said that America is agreement incapable.
That's right. Yeah. Not agreement capable. Yeah, there's a word in Russian for that, but we don't have it.
So,
but yeah, and I really is. I've said on this show many times before. I don't think we have anyone trained in any of our international foreign policy, programs around the country in our fine universities, who actually is capable of diplomacy. I mean, they are not capable of operating in an environment in which they have to treat other nations as equals, and they have to actually listen to what the representatives of those nations are saying and take heed to it. That's just not something that the U.S. trains its people to do. No, we are the exceptional nations. We tell you what to do. Yeah.
Lex says, I live near the German border. They are protesting against Schultz and demand investigation for the pipeline. But it's hard to find the truth between the big media cabal for ordinary people. You can tackle that right there.
Yeah. No, I think I have heard a number of reports that Cy Hirsch's investigation and any other and their own investigation just not happening. They're not putting this on the media in Germany particularly, but anywhere in Western Europe, because all of Western Europe right now is suffering because of this these sanctions that they made against Russia, and because that pipeline was severed instead of actually just being able to negotiate with Russia, and that's but yeah, they really have to keep that from the people. And that's what they will do. They've kept a great deal from the American people over the years. So when you find, we're finally able to understand what our own history has been, we may. I mean, I would love to see us just review our own history since the Second World War, and honestly and completely. We might open a few eyes.
No Way Out says the worst on this colonialism of France is that they still receive money to allow them to be sovereign. It's billions of euros. Not just that, but let me drop something on your mind. Some of you may not be aware of this. That the French sued Haiti. You can Google this, or you can go look it up in records. They sued Haiti and won in what is called, quote unquote, international court. The lawsuit was that Haiti, because of the revolution and the desire for the Haitians to become free from colonialism, France lost billions of dollars in rubber and rum on the island of Haiti. And so the so-called international court, which is in Europe, sided with the colonizer. And that is one reason why Haiti still pays a huge portion of whatever little money they get to the French, because the Haitians wanted to be free, and they rebelled against slavery, and they had an uprising and a revolution and overthrew the French government and French occupation.
Yeah.
And now they're tens of billions of dollars in debt to the French because they didn't want to be slaves. That is great. I'm not making this up. Go.
Nope, he's not making it up. And Haiti even today is the poorest nation, in the Western Hemisphere by far, and has basically been trying to overcome the colonialism of the U.S. for many generations. and it still hasn't been able to do so, because every time they try to get a government, they elect a government that actually has the interests of the Haitian people at heart. We overthrow it. It's not permitted.
Well, it's been a pleasure, Charles. Yeah, we got to do it again. Remember, we have another we have to do. But in closing, what have you to say to everybody that's listening and that will listen?
Well, first of all, I'm happy that they are listening, because I think we have to get together, and we have to begin to look, we have to begin to prioritize. I'll say this about things. I mean, what's really important is that we not have a nuclear war, that we learn to get along with one another as nations. What's really important is that we stop this neoliberal madness that funneling all of the money to the rich people and not have anything for poor people, for infrastructure, for education, for health, none of that stuff. We've got to stop that. And it doesn't, we need to say, like, okay, what's really important in this world and what is less important? Not that the things aren't important, but, we have to quit arguing about the little things and get together and win something on the big things.
Well, thank you, man. Thank you for coming and sharing your thoughts with me. It's been a pleasure. And for those of you who are listening, I'd like to thank you all for joining us. Also, we may have it live. If my voice comes back, we may have it live tomorrow morning. If my voice doesn't come back, we'll have a live either Sunday or Monday. But please check us out. Tell others about us. Share the show. Take clips from the show. We encourage to get the truth out any and every way possible. On that note, I love you, but remember that God will always love you best. Until we next speak again, stay strong, stay true, but above all things, stay righteous. And as I go out, I always have to say, Mama, your baby boy loves you more than life. Peace.